Okay, Chairman, the floor is yours.
Thank you. If I could remind all those on the line, if you're not speaking, please mute your lines. That'll help us all be able to participate. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this May 21st, 2020 emergency meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. A note for all listening that a quorum is 7 members, which was confirmed prior to the start of this meeting. I now ask for a motion to approve the May 21st, 2020 agenda.
So moved.
Moves, Mr. Ford.
Motion by Mr. Ford. Is there a second?
Second, Mrs. Kamnitz.
Second by Ms. Kamnitz. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton,
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers, Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Ford, Mr. Chastain, Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Present.
Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
Thank you. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of the board. Does any member of this board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record, and if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. We'll begin our meeting today with a report from our superintendent. I'll turn to Superintendent Johnson.
Thank you, and want to start with an important announcement that really has a lot to do with how we go back to school next year. One of the many aspects of starting school in the fall. As we know, we are all facing unprecedented challenges, and we need at DPI and all education leaders to do everything we can to eliminate uncertainty going into next school year. So I am happy to announce that for the first time, we will be able to have local school districts decide the K-3 reading diagnostic tool that they would like to use in their schools for this coming school year. We have already shared that with the state board and local superintendents. We will likely return to one diagnostic for the entire state in the years ahead, but this is the right decision for next school year. The next steps on this, already DPI is working on how this will work for the state. First, we are drafting policy for the state board's review and approval that will identify the short list of reading diagnostic tools that meet the criteria in law and state board policy. The state board will also have an allotment policy to approve that will send the Read to Achieve funding to the district, and they will do the contracting with the vendor they select, and of course the work on the more technical IT end on how this data reports up to the state is being worked on right now as well. So that is exciting news to be able to share, and we will continue to work on that in the near immediate future as there will be state board policies that will be brought to you soon. On another note, I want to do a special acknowledgement to Wade Butner. Wade Butner is one of our hardworking legislative liaisons at DPI. He will be moving on from DPI into a new role. We want to congratulate him and thank him for his hard work, especially during this COVID-19 crisis. It was, as anyone who tried to work with the General Assembly during this time of social distancing can tell you, it was more challenging than ever before, but getting in touch with those legislators to get those proposals from DPI and the state board in front of them and agreed upon, really a shout out to him and all of our legislative team at DPI and the state board. And we have a special graduation coming up. Obviously, we just heard, congratulations to anyone graduating today. I think we should. I'll yield my time to our principal advisors to let them have some words after I stop. But also, we have a fun graduation plan at the Charlotte Motor Speedway, and I think it's going to be quite an experience, and really grateful to the Charlotte Motor Speedway and the local schools that are able to take part in that, and a shout out to the communications team at DPI that helped make that possible. So real quickly, I'd like to turn it over to our principal of the year advisors. Would love you all to give some graduation words to our class of 2020. I have been saying around the state that while this class has missed so many of the normal things that make senior year so memorable, anyone with a diploma from the year 2020 truly can carry that with them as a badge of honor of strength and resilience during unprecedented times that really challenged the health of our community, the economy, and just the way of life of our entire society. And they have risen to that challenge. North Carolina, I like to say this a lot. We are where we say where the weak grow strong and the strong grow great. And truly, our seniors this year are strong, and they will take their next steps and grow great. So I'd love to turn it over to our principals to share any words of wisdom you'd like to your graduating classes.
Superintendent Johnson, I tend to find myself going after Tabari Wallace, but because I unmuted first, I'm hoping that I might be able to go before Tabari this time. Tabari and I have been so collaborative in our discussions about the class of 2020 and our graduation events. We are so concerned that we want to make sure that this year's graduation, the commencement event, really tees students up for what comes next. That graduation may feel like the end, but commencement feels like the beginning. And we do truly feel that the K-12 experience that our graduates have set them up for a bright and optimistic future. So over in Edgecombe County, tonight is our graduation night. We have been working for 2 weeks to do pre-recording of different elements of our graduation events. We had a wonderful outdoor event last Saturday in which we had families and students, and it really turned into just a celebration of students and affirmations of families and the it takes a village to raise a child ethos that I think is true, particularly this year during the pandemic. So we tonight at 6 o'clock will be streaming our first virtual graduation event, and we've had so much fun thinking outside the box about ways to affirm our graduates. So I know that that is happening at every LEA across our state. Every high school principal and every district is doing their very best to make sure that they affirm and that they recognize and they validate and they cheer on the class of 2020. And so we'll be doing that tonight in Edgecombe, and also sending lots of love to all of our principals across the state who are doing that same thing for their school families. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, Superintendent Johnson.
Oh, well, I'll definitely play second fiddler to the speaker, to the commencement speaker that should be going on today. I want to congratulate my good friend and colleague, Matt Bristow-Smith, and all of his graduates, and as well as all of the other early college graduates across this great state. I just want to tell you that you are the true testament of perseverance, endurance, and resiliency that really all of us, the rest of us in America, needs to take a page from. These students have been through so much, and now that they're again having to endure this one moment in time that we all hold so dear and true to our hearts. Each and every one of us have our graduation picture hanging up at Mama House. And we wanted to make sure, I think all the principals, high school principals across this state, is going above and beyond to make sure that we, quote unquote, build a bridge to that memory for our students. I know a lot of us, some of us have delayed graduation with the hopes of having it maybe in August, hopefully, to have a traditional graduation so we can make sure they get all the pomp and circumstance that they deserve. But I know a lot of us are still going to commemorate that date of June 13th. And I know, especially in our district, all of our high schools are doing a type of slideshow celebration with all the senior accomplishments and everything to make sure that this day does not pass and that society at large sees and recognizes and celebrates with the graduates because they have finished this 13-year journey. So I just wanted to let all the graduates of 2020 know we stand with you. America stands with you. We understand exactly what you're going through. You are not alone in this endeavor. You have endured it, and you've held your head high. And we are so proud of you. And I, for one, want to be like you when I grow up. So congratulations to the class of 2020. I just can't say enough for you. You are the best, and you are definitely a illustration and a beacon for the rest of us to follow.
Well, thank y'all. Thank y'all for being the voice of the principals, because I know that is echoed across the entire state. And there's a lot of great work going on across the state. So thank y'all very much.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. I note for the record, the board will take a roll call vote on all items requiring action on the agenda. And we'll now proceed directly to our committee work, and we'll begin with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, chaired by Mr. Buxton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I was asleep at the wheel early. I'd like to be recused from ESNP 1. My apologies for just getting that to you.
Let the record reflect Mr. Buxton is recused from ESNP 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board. I'm joined on the SLA committee by Dr. Livia Oxendine. We have one item on the agenda today, an action on first reading. COVID-19 remote instruction plans. As you know, in Senate Bill 704, there's a requirement for districts to submit remote instruction plans, and so we have a planning approach from the department to share with you today. I think it's Dr. Emery, or perhaps Dr. Stegall.
It's actually going to be Sneha and Vanessa.
There we go. I stand corrected.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, board members, and all those listening. Today we have for you a new policy, SPLN 006. This policy is reflected and will mirror Senate Bill 704, version D, the final ratified version, regarding remote instruction plans in response to COVID-19 crisis. This policy codifies the law and ensures that each and every public school unit develops a remote instruction plan for the 2021 school year, which shall be submitted no later than July 20th, based on the remote instruction plans provide a framework for quality remote instruction to all students within the public school unit during the 2021 school year. The remote instruction plans will also provide a foundation for blended learning with flexibility and quality to respond to the future COVID-19 disruptions that may occur during the school year. Before we go into the details, we did want to share with the board all of the groups that we have talked to in the last 10 days since the bill was passed, 14 days since the bill was passed. We have spoken to the superintendents and charter school leaders to get their input on the process. We have spoken to the CAO advisory group, as well as the Chief Technology Officer Steering Committee, as well as have worked closely with the Remote Learning Task Force out of the Superintendents Association, as well as internal directors, to ensure that if there were any other areas that were possible areas to include to strengthen the plan, we have added those into an optional section. So before we go through some of the logistics of this planning process, I do want to introduce to you Dr. Vanessa Wren, our DTL director here at DPI, and she will review with you the actual components which are required in the plan. Vanessa.
And thank you, Sneha. Thank you, board members. The plan includes 13 components to make remote learning effective. Again, as mentioned earlier, it's a framework to provide quality instruction. The 13 components are pretty in-depth, and I want to go through those with you so you can understand exactly what each plan will include from each PSU. And then we'll talk about the supports that we'll be putting in place to help PSUs as they develop that plan and we collect those. The first component in the development of each plan is consulting with teachers, administrators, and instructional staff, parents, students, community partners, and any other stakeholders as they develop their plan, and also required to communicate their remote instruction plan to all of those stakeholders. The second component is training for teachers and staff on how to use remote instruction resources, and also how students will submit that work, and identifying any online and offline resources that will be used by grade level. And that also includes learning management systems and any other platforms that will be used. Third component is defining and clearly communicating staff expectations and roles, including what their roles and expectations will be if remote instruction occurs on a teacher workday. Fourth, surveying teacher and student connectivity and providing an option for students and staff who have limited connectivity and how they will operationalize on remote learning days. Fifth is ensuring that your community partners are engaged with and how they will provide free broadband, access and connectivity and childcare options on remote learning days, and making sure remote learning days and the plan are communicated to those community partners. 6, develop an effective design and delivery of remote instruction lessons within professional learning communities. 7 is practicing and training students on non-remote days on how to use instructional platforms, how to locate assignments, how to complete those, and giving them regular opportunities to practice while they are on campus so they will know what to do on remote learning days. 8, communicating the learning targets to students of what they must accomplish on remote learning days, ensuring that lesson design provides instructional time, practice, and application components to demonstrate their learning, and including a process for monitoring the quality of the remote instruction materials. Number 9, ensuring that remote instruction time, practice, and application supports learning growth, and it leads towards mastery of the standard course of study. And it also includes work measurement guidelines that are appropriate for each grade level, including what is due, when it's due, and how they submit those on remote learning days. Number 10, ensuring that students with disabilities have equal access to remote instruction and that it's provided in a manner consistent with each student's individual IEP or 504. Remote learning day supports have to be considered as appropriate when an IEP or 504 plan is initially developed, and also should be included in subsequent reviews of existing IEPs and 504 plans. Component 11 is the tracking and reporting of attendance on remote instruction days, including the protocols for determining what will account for attendance and how that will be reported. And that plan must also be communicated to parents before remote instruction days begin. Item 12 is providing online and offline contact options for students to communicate with teachers or staff on remote instruction days, and that is only applicable to days that aren't going to be also designated as a teacher work day. And lastly, item 13 is providing technology support for students who need technical assistance during remote instruction days. So you can see those 13 criteria are somewhat in depth, but are all put in place to design for effective remote learning. So we also know as a result, there needs to be some supports in place for our districts as they move into a reactionary remote learning plan to a more thoughtful, developed remote learning implementation. So we will be hosting technical webinars on June 2nd for LEAs and charter schools as we go through the plan, how we will collect those, what supports will be in place around each one of the 13 components that I just outlined. And all this leads us to do some very accurate reporting as we are required to do in Senate Bill 704. And as part of that reporting, we will be turning in a copy of each one of the PSU's remote learning plans and reporting on the completeness and inventorying the online and offline resources that were made available. So I will turn that back over to Sneha, and she will wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wren. The other piece that we would like to propose and recommend to the board is to include an additional item as a required element. This comes from reaction and comments that we have received from public school units, superintendents and charter school leaders across the state, at how it is incredibly important that we also address the limitations that exist for implementation of quality remote learning based on the PSU's local context. We have spoken to many of our superintendents and other leaders who remain concerned while all efforts and intentions to provide quality remote instruction for future issues and disruptions related to COVID-19, they remain incredibly concerned at the continued issues of broadband issues for both students and staff, as well as issues of devices, etc. So we recommend that each plan also have a required component of sharing the limitations, so that way that is clearly understood by any stakeholder reading the plan. In addition, we would like to encourage public school units to consider additional information regarding some areas that are holes in the, regarding some areas that could be included to ensure a more comprehensive program and comprehensive remote instruction. One would be responding to the needs of students such as English learners, AIG learners, as well as students who have been identified and are served under the McKinney-Vento Act as homeless. Really thinking through providing students and parents with remote learning strategies and behaviors to support student success, whether it be a quick top 10 of creating the space if possible, a schedule, et cetera, at home, as well as the impact on other existing programs such as transition to kindergarten and career and college promise. We continue to hear reports of students that, especially when in career and college promise, that this year have had some particular challenges, and we want to make sure that our districts are thinking really deeply about if we are going to be moving in and out of schedules, how to ensure those students remain supported. The plan shall be written following the guidelines that we have shown here, but also the process and the template that we will share to all public school units by June 5th, if not a little sooner. I think June 2nd is the day we'll be sharing through our through webinars with both charter school leaders and our district leaders. And then what we are asking is that public school units provide further feedback if needed for the requirements of our report, which is due to the General Assembly on September 15th. It is a very detailed report down to what exact resource districts are using, a list of resources by PSU. And so if that is not included in the plan itself, we'll be reaching back out. We are going to make this as easy as possible for our districts, as well as creating a template that is incredibly broad to allow our districts to adapt as needed and share the information that they feel is pertinent to the General Assembly and the board. That ends our overview, Mr. Buxton.
Ms. Coltrane, thank you very much. And Dr. Wren, thank you as well. Appreciate the department's work on pulling this together. Board members, this is a policy that we would pass actually on first reading today, to be followed by a template that would be shared in a process with our public school districts by June the 5th. Let me get any questions.
Mr. Buxton, I have a quick question. This is Olivia.
Please, Dr. Oxendine.
Yes, my question, and it could be in this information that is before us, but I'm not grabbing it immediately, so let me ask the question. So where in the plan do we capture the homebound students? Would that be in the area 504s?
Yes, ma'am. Depending on the student's IEP, that would be in there. Yes, ma'am, in the IEP and the 504 plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Ford?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the exhaustive look and in-depth look at all 13 of the components and the recommended pieces. I guess I had a question, and it might be kind of semantical, but the piece about the provisions for English language learners, was there a particular reason why that wasn't included in as one of the 13 components? Because, as opposed to like consideration, because it appears to me like that is like, when I was looking at the 13, that jumped out to me as one of the areas. I was like, man, that should really be included as a requirement, versus sort of a consideration, because every district, we're talking about every LEA is going to have varying size of linguistically diverse students. And so in terms of equity, that's one of the major areas I have of concern with remote learning. So is there a reason why that was not included in the 13?
We mirrored exactly what was written in Senate Bill 704 after consulting with all of our advisory groups. But we've also included that, and I think Ms. Coltrane referenced that earlier, as an optional question and guidance area for districts to be able to include how they will be reaching English language learners, as well as students that are McKinney-Vento and any other groups that they would like to put there. So we've made a way for districts to be able to address that inside of their plan.
So I guess what I'm asking is, why is that optional versus mandatory, right? Considering that every LEA is going to have ELs as part of their district, and we are going to have to make sure we make provisions for those students. So is there a way we can make that less of an option and more mandatory?
That would be up to the board. Absolutely, that is always an option. We brought to you the required elements in the legislation, Mr. Ford, in response to districts and charter school leaders asking us not to put any additional information required. But the board would have absolute, if they would like to see that, we're happy to make that change.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. I think we've certainly satisfied the legislative requirement with the 13 that are in Senate Bill 704. This is a state board policy, so to the extent we have additional ones that we think are important, I think we do have that latitude. So let me at the end come back and talk about that first bullet, which is an encouragement right now, whether we want to make that an additional submission requirement to LEAs. And I think you've laid out a pretty clear rationale where that's important. I want to go unless Mr. Ford, you have an additional comment. Make sure.
No, sir. Appreciate you. Thank you.
All right, let me go to Ms. Kamnitz and then Mr. Bristow-Smith.
I am really pleased to see the requirement to have a statement about the limitations that each district is facing, because I think that any amount of planning for remote instruction is only as good as the access from students' homes, and we've got so many areas of the state that are deeply challenged in that area, particularly the Northeast. And so we've got to continue to be realistic about the limitations that systems are going to face, and also continue to try to find ways to help solve those issues.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. Mr. Bristow-Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. One of the things I appreciate about the first page of this remote instruction plan is that item number 1 on the first page indicates that in addition to staff and community partners and other stakeholders, that students and parents will be data sources for how these remote instruction plans will be designed. And I just think that that is absolutely critical, that as we think about the logistics of remote instruction, curriculum, implementation, and all of those various aspects, we've got to remember that at the end of the day, these remote instruction plans can only be measured by one metric, and that is whether or not we have served all students and made sure we've met our constitutional obligation for them to have a sound basic education, even in remote instruction. So I would just implore all LEAs, as they take these remote instruction plans and they move to the implementation phase, to not use student data and parent data as anecdotal data sources, but to use them as primary data sources. I would implore our LEAs to do empathy interviews, not with the parents and kids that have been engaged in remote learning, but for those that have been disengaged. Reach out into the communities, find those children that we lost in March, April, and May of this year, find out why we lost them and what we can do to bring them back into the loop in August. And it's so critical that while we're dealing with the architecture and infrastructure of our central offices and implementing remote instruction, that we at the end of the day have to use students and parents as the data source, because they are our end user. These plans are designed for them. And I just wanted to make sure that area of emphasis was lifted up.
Thank you, Mr. Bristow-Smith. Well said. Dr. Oxendine, another question from you.
Yes, one final question, and it has to do with how, what is the plan for addressing and communicating back to the LEAs any deficiencies or need to improve or readdress these 13 components. So what is the mechanism for the plan? Thank you.
Shaw Coltrane or Dr. Wren?
We will be providing, after our initial webinar, we do plan on providing weekly technical assistance sessions focused on themes throughout the plan. However, when the 300 to 400 plans come in, we are not, the legislation does not mandate us to provide deep feedback, which is not even possible by our staff. We do not have the capacity to do that. However, we will be reviewing all of the plans, looking for patterns and trends that we will report back to you. We will remain in constant touch with the school districts and the charter schools and the other public school units. I do believe this applies to lab schools and the regional schools as well, to provide assistance when needed. Like I said, we'll be providing weekly technical assistance until the due date through July. And then when we do see some major holes, we will definitely reach out, but we will not be providing written feedback to all 400 plans. We do not have the capacity or the time. In that, the time to report back will be in September. So we will continue to work, though, to provide ongoing support and formative feedback as needed.
And this is Vanessa Wren. One other support I just want to lift up as well is one of the things we're hearing is the learning curve for teachers who may not have had opportunities to work in blended learning or online learning. So we're working to build a cohort around remote instruction coaches that can be utilized throughout the state to help provide some of that training and support.
This remains a huge lift for our school districts and other public school units. This legislation is very comprehensive, but we do continue to receive comments of concern of the issues of equity regarding broadband devices, the issues of professional development, as Dr. Wren just spoke, as well as curricular resources and platforms and issues that are beyond our control regarding the families ending up being our educators. And of course, all of those concerns still remain. While we have just gone through emergency remote instruction and remote learning, we do know that there is a significantly more intentional planning happening, which will be reflected in these plans. But it is important to continually remember all of the issues and limitations that will not disappear in the next 8 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks when our students come back to school.
Thank you, Michelle Coltrane and Dr. Wren. Appreciate those important reminders about the major lift this is for our districts. If we could go back to the, Ms. Townsend-Smith, if we could put that remote instruction plan back up and go down to page 3. I want to raise back up the issue Mr. Ford asked about, which is looking at the first bullet. Thank you. Under, let me just read it. In the remote instruction plans, public school units are also encouraged to consider adding additional information regarding, in the first bullet we discussed earlier, about responding to the needs of other school populations such as English learners, AIG learners, and students who have been identified and are served under the McKinney-Vento Act as homeless. As I heard it, Mr. Ford was suggesting that we ought to just make this a required element in the plan for this board policy, adding it to the list of 13 from Senate Bill 704. Let me ask if there are any questions or objections with respect to that recommendation by Mr. Ford.
This is Mariah Morris, and I don't have any objections or questions, but I would like to second his comment wholeheartedly. As a former ESL teacher, I know that this is going to take a very strategic and proactive approach from LEAs, and I'm concerned about merely encouraging them that it might be lost in some of the other more strongly worded language. So to make that as a requirement, I think will help LEAs be intentional and proactive in reaching families who are not able to connect as naturally and have language as barriers.
Thank you, Ms. Morris. Any other comments here? And Ms. Shaw Coltrane and Dr. Wren, comments welcome from you as well.
Where we would put it, just to let the board know, is we would put it like we did the limitations section as a shall as well, but yet keep it clear that verse 13, we're responsive to that, and then these are the additional elements.
Thank you, Michelle Coltrane. Mr. Wallace, I think you may have a question here.
Yes, just to follow up with what Mariah said, also wanted to throw in there our AIG students. That's in the same paragraph as well, just to make sure those needs are met, because they get a little bit more rigorous approach to academia. But I also wanted to say on number 4, with surveying students and parents, I agree with Matt Bristol Smith in regards to making sure their voices are heard. But with surveying parents, I wanted to make sure that the guidance was given to the LEAs when surveying the parents and when they need to delineate whether or not that is a phone hotspot as far as their internet connectivity or whether it is a hub. We're finding out on the front lines that the phone hotspot usually results in, breaks in connectivity and this and that. And when kids do I just say an hour assignment and they upload it to, let's say an LMS like Canvas, they lose their work. And it's hard to ask the child to go back and redo an hour's worth of work due to their limited connectivity. So districts need to understand that in regards to that and maybe have a backup plan like paper, pencil, whatsoever have you for those kind of students. But when you ask a kid, do they have internet connectivity? Everybody has Google connectivity to their phone or a hotspot, so they will reply yes. And we're finding out that is not conducive to doing true online learning or digital learning to a proficient level. So I just wanted to make sure we understood that, especially in this body. And that is a problem we're seeing wholeheartedly on the front lines in regards to internet connectivity.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Those are important insights. Mr. Chairman, what I would suggest, without objection, is that we consider this policy, since it's action on first read, with the bullet on page 3, the first bullet that begins with responding, we would move that up under the first paragraph on page 3, and we would say that public school units shall also describe and then add in that bullet. So it would be, in addition to the limitations, would be this first bullet, and we would have that as a required item on the plans, given the conversation here.
Mr. Buxton, that seems most appropriate given the discussion your committee just had, and so the record should reflect that the motion that will come with this item reflects the adjustments that Mr. Buxton just described.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just one comment before I send it back to you. I think given what all, especially our advisors, have said about this work, what the department has said about their feedback, and what Dr. Wren and Ms. Shaw-Coltrane mentioned about trying to put some coaches in place, this is such a critical issue for our districts. We're going to be remote in some way, shape, or form over the next year. I think we all know that, whether it's fully or in patches. And to the degree the department has the ability to bring in external resources, whether it's through our significant number of vacancies we have and the ability to perhaps contract with folks to provide supports for districts in planning their remote instruction plans in addition to our department resources. I think that would be a wise use of personnel behind priorities. And so would make that comment as I give it back to you. Thank you. That's our agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton, and particularly your final comment, I think, is a critical role that the department could play in supporting our districts. I want to highlight Ms. Shaw-Coltrane's comment, particularly around the heavy lift that this is for our districts and other public school units. Just like so many things associated with this pandemic, it creates both great opportunity and great responsibility. And I think we need to be mindful that this one requirement, very valid and needed remote learning plans, are but one of many requirements that are being added to the normal load that our districts face in order for us to better serve our students in the coming year. I think your discussion, Mr. Buxton, among your committee also highlights the critical nature that reliable, speedy, and affordable broadband service is so critical to the education of our students. But it's critical not just to the education of our K through 12 students is critical to the education of all levels. And in fact, it's more than an education issue. Just like electricity and clean water and sewer, an absolute necessity in terms of the utility for every home in North Carolina is reliable and speedy broadband access. And so I think it's incumbent upon our state and all leaders across our state to recognize that the private sector will not fill this gap. The capitalism environment, which serves us so well, doesn't fill this gap. And it's upon us as a state, from an economic development, from commerce, from yes, education, but beyond education, to all facets of our society, that the state take the lead and deliver, perhaps with resources from the federal government, but take a lead in delivering to every corner of North Carolina the broadband access that all of our citizens, including our students, need to be able to compete and win in a highly competitive environment, as well as to achieve the quality of life that we all aspire them to. So thank you for this work on the remote learning plans, and we'll now move to the Educator Standards and Practice Committee, and I'll turn to the chair of that committee, Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the Educator Standards and Practices Committee, and joining me in that responsibility is Ms. Amy White. Good morning, board members, and to those in the audience of listeners. I'm bringing to the board today 3 items under the category of action on first reading. I assume that Dr. Tomberlin, and perhaps, I'm certainly not sure about this, but maybe Mr. Snyder might be joining him, but Dr. Tomberlin will be the primary presenter of these 3 items. And we also have, board members, 1 item for new business. The first item under action on first reading will be of great interest to our EPB deans, who are probably wondering and discussing what to do about licensure and what to do about admission scores to get into EPPs. And I'm sure our HR directors are certainly will be attentive to this item. Number 2 pertains to the reemployment of retired educators. The second item under ES&P 9.42 comes under the policy titled Contagious Disease Policy, but more specifically, it will go into the revisiting of the emergency leave section of the policy. So, Dr. Tomberlin, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. Good morning, everyone. This is Tom Tomberlin, Director of Educator Recruitment and Support, and it is my honor to present to you today the policy recommendations related to the recent passage of Session Law 2020-3, or Senate Bill 704. So I will cover these policy recommendations kind of in some order about the aspects of educator prep and licensure that they affect. Briefly, I want to share with you the input process on this. So right after the law was passed, we convened our HR teacher and retention recruitment task force, which is made up of HR directors and superintendents from across the state. We put the law in front of them and got policy recommendations with input from them, which we then took to PEP-C, which made further recommendations and refinements. And so that what you see before you has gone through some pretty extensive vetting from the field and from designated advisory groups. So the first thing that I'd like to do is just give you kind of a plain language summary of the impact of Senate Bill 704. And we'll dive into the actual policy language, but this is just a reference for you to know kind of what's being covered in each of these policies at a high level. So in TCED 009 is the admission requirements for EPPs for the 2021 school year. Eval 042 talks about the clinical internships and how we're addressing the school closures in that for that requirement. TCED 008 sanctions for EPPs will only include data that we could capture in the 1920 school year. TCED 013, the accountability model, will only include those available data, and there's some reporting requirements there that I'll cover with you. TCED 015, MSA candidates, principal candidates and their internships, as well as other internships. And LICN 001, the deadlines for completing licensure exams and courseworks extending to June 30th, 2021. So that's just kind of the high level approach to that. Again, here's the kind of layout as we'll be covering this. So if you need to go back and reference a policy, you'll know where those different aspects are. So for TCED 009, the minimum admission requirements and exceptions for initial EPPs. So under this policy, so I am on slide 7 now. If catch up, there we go. So one of the formatting issues that I need board members to pay attention to. Actually, if we can go to the next slide, I think it's 6, actually, I'm sorry. One of the formatting issues in this presentation, you'll see this policy is, recommendation is in green. That is an indication to you as the board that that is lifted straight out of the law. We did not embellish or alter the law in any way. We basically lifted that and put it into policy. That's important for you to know, because then that policy would not be subject to the rulemaking process. You will, however, see certain policies in this presentation that are in purple font. That is an indication where we had to make a policy determination, and that is not technically covered by the law and is a recommendation to the board, and those will be subject to the rulemaking process. Also, I want to point out, if you look at the actual policies, and you should have all those as resources, the way we have formatted the policies themselves, since this is a 2021 specific change to the policy, we did not want to integrate it into the actual policy. So at the top of every policy is a disclaimer that there are 2021 specific policy changes related to COVID-19 that appear at the bottom of that policy. So that directs everybody back to that policy, to the bottom of the policy, to understand what those changes are for 2021. But since they will be going away at the end of the 2021 school year, we didn't want to write it into the sections directly. If board members find that that's an issue, we can address that as well, but I just wanted to make that clear. So for the first policy, TCED 009, this waives the pre-professional skills test, the SAT or ACT minimums for admission to an EPP. It also waives the bachelor's degree requirement. However, we felt that was a little confusing, so we point out that the bachelor's degree is still required for a residency license, but the requirement for a bachelor's degree for admission to an EPP, so these would be your traditional program completers, is not a requirement. And number 2, this outlines the GPA of 2.7 is waived for this coming school year. And EPPs shall not permit a student to commence with their clinical practice until such time as the GPA has reached the 2.7. Also, which is going to prove very difficult for our EPPs, the minimum GPA for the I'm sorry, the minimum GPA requirement for the cohort of 3.0 has been waived for the 2021 school year. So the next section is eval 024, and this relates to the clinical practice requirements for EPPs. So this section waives that requirement for a student for the 1920 school year. So as the first bullet, as much time as the student was able to complete, the EPP has the authority to deem that amount of time as satisfying the requirement. The student can't complete program by August 15th unless the clinical internship is deemed complete. So that waives that deadline for completing that clinical internship, since they would not have that opportunity. Students engaged in remote instruction as part of their clinical internship, that allows for that to count towards that clinical internship. And then the student has otherwise met the EPP requirements for certification utilized by the EPP and the LEA partner school. So those are the conditions under which a student's clinical internship could be deemed complete, even if that person did not meet all 16 weeks. The next section deals with the pedagogy assessment. So the State Board of Education does not require these individuals to have completed that pedagogy exam prior to clinical practice. You do not have that policy currently, but we just lifted the law as it was written because the State Board doesn't mandate that EPPs have completers pass that pedagogy test in order to do their student teaching. Some EPPs have that requirement, but the State Board does not require them. State Board shall not require these individuals to have the assessment completed as a condition of EPP completement. We currently don't do that. But number 3, these individuals shall complete the pedagogy assessment by the end of the first year and shall pass the assessment by the end of the third. And that is our current policy anyway. But again, we wanted just to bring the provisions of the law into this. So the next slide shows our first State Board policy specific recommendation. And here we give the section of the original policy that's modified. This covers our student services personnel. They don't technically have clinical internship requirements in law, but of course the State Board has put some requirements for a clinical internship around these folks. And by student services personnel, I'm specifically talking about guidance counselors, school social workers, school psychologists, those types of positions. So this policy would allow the same provisions we allow for a student teacher. If they've met those, if they've done some form of clinical internship hours, then that can be deemed acceptable if they otherwise meet the requirements of the EPP and the partner, the school partner. So I'll take a pause right there just for a second because, and see if there's any questions about anything I've covered so far.
Yes, board members, do you have questions or commentary at this time? This is extensive work. It is very, very comprehensive. It goes into, and thank you, Dr. Tomberlin, for presenting the information that's already in place and that kind of helps bring all pieces of this together.
Sure.
If there are no questions or comments, then you may proceed, Tom.
Excellent. TCED 008 is rather small. It refers to the sanctions for educator prep programs. If you'll advance to the next slide, we shall not, the State Board of Education shall not consider data that was not practically available for 1920 school year. Number 2 is just an information item. It's not part of the policy. It is to let you know that the only source of data that NCDPI will have for the accountability model from 1920 is the survey. recent graduate survey and the employer survey. EVOS and NESIS will not be available for the 1920 school year. So TCD 013, the EPP accountability requirements and risk factors. So for the accountability model, again, we are only able to collect and report what is practicably available for our performance reports. We will collect everything as usual for 1920, and we start this process towards the end of May. For the EPP report cards, because of the limited data collection for this school year, these report cards are required to be reported to the JLEOC as usual. So our office will compile those reports. They will make them available to, they will present that report to the State Board of Education for approval and transmission to the JLEOC. However, we are precluded by statute from displaying those report cards on the website. So now I think the act of presenting them to you and to the JLEOC would be a public act. So it doesn't speak to any of that process, but it does preclude us from putting them on the website. In that report, we have to indicate the number and overall percentage of students who were admitted to an EPP with a GPA less than 2.7, and then the number and overall percentage of students who had their clinical internships deemed completed, where that completion was not the result of 16 full weeks of an internship. The dashboard is not covered under this provision, so we will work with the General Assembly to understand what data can and should be reported on the dashboard for that year without violating any of the provisions of the law. TCED 015, school admin prep programs. This section just allows for school administrators to have their internships deemed complete. As you know, most MSA programs have a minimum of 5 months internship and a maximum of around 10 months. If they were not able to complete those, we can deem what was practicably they were practicably able to complete up to March 10th, or there are other provisions for if they're engaged in online internships that could count. The candidate would still have to complete the portfolio that demonstrates the application of their training to actual school needs. But if that is hindered by the school closures, then the EPP has the authority to deem that whatever work was able to be done as completing the requirement. Specifically for TP3 programs, which is the next slide, a school leader candidate can't be denied the stipend that they would have received or any of the grant funds because they failed to meet the year-long requirement or the 5-month requirement for the internship. So that the Education Authority is the administrator of those grant funds. That's less about us, but we still wanted to put it in policy for folks to understand that they would not, their grant funds would not be affected by the school closure.
Dr. Tomberlin, would you just, if you don't mind, if you would just take a minute or two and explain a bit about the TP3, because it is an MSA program. However, it's not the full degree. It is the principal licensure program. Would you just take a minute and kind of broad brush that?
Yeah, so TP3, as of July 1st, TP3 will be the consolidation of these transforming principal preparation programs. This is a special grant program that was developed by the state to support kind of more exploring other possibilities for preparing principals for the field. In the past, and then there's also been the Principal Fellows Program. And so these two entities are merging as of July 1st. And so those programs are designed to give principals a more experience-driven training than simply coursework for the MSA program. So even embedded in their coursework are field experiences where they kind of have more of a practical application of their learning to the role of principal. That's not to suggest that regular MSAs don't do this, but that's the articulated goal of these TP3 programs and the Principal Fellows Program. So, but schools still do have just traditional MSA programs built off coursework. They do internships. It's just they have slightly different requirements for the TP3 programs and the Principal Fellows than they do for a traditional MSA program.
Thank you very much.
Certainly. So the next policy is LICN 001, general licensure requirements. So teacher licensure extensions. The additional time for licensure has been granted for the following individuals. Those who are in their first year of the license, an IPL, lateral, or residency, the requirement to attempt the test in the first year is waived, and the student may take the candidate may take the exam, attempt the exam in the second year of licensure. So the interpretation that we're making on this is this was not an obstacle to completion. If they didn't fulfill that requirement, the licensure office would notify the candidate that they did not meet that requirement. We would hold off those notifications for current first-year teachers until the end of next year. So they would have we would not notify them that they didn't take the test in this year if they're a first year. An applicant for a CPL who holds a lateral entry license, they're extended to June 1st, 2021, regardless of whether the reason is examination or coursework. So that extension would be offered to those lateral licensing holders. This is really important because, as you know, the policies around lateral entry were frozen by statute. So the legislature provided this extension for those folks who otherwise could not have extended. Applicants who hold an IPL, if they're meeting if their expiration date of their license is June 30th, 2020, they shall be granted an extension to June 30th, 2021. And then finally, a candidate for CPL who holds an elementary or ECGC license, IPL or residency license that has not met that has a June 30th, 2020 expiration shall be granted an extension until June 30th, 2021. The reason this is set out like this is because they were afforded an extension last year. So if they had a 2019 expiration date of their license, they were extended to 2020. Those folks, according to the law, do qualify for the extension to 2021. So both those that were extended to 2020 and those who just had a regular IPL expiration of 2020 are extended to 2021.
Dr. Tomberlin, if I could pause for no more than a few seconds. So
Sure.
What you are now explaining relative to letter D is helping clarify why elementary ed and EC, the general curriculum license, stands out from C, right?
That is correct, and that is delineated in the statute as well. They wanted to make it clear that even if you got an extension from 2019 to 2020, this covers those elementary and ECGC teachers that receive that extension. They also get an additional extension to 2021.
Thank you very much. Whoever, I know you were at the table leading this, but you caught all the nuance. Good for you.
Well, I will ask you to reserve that judgment until I get to the end. But thank you, I appreciate that. There are some nuances that have arisen since we've put this out, but we'll get to that at the end of the presentation.
All right, great.
So,
do I hear someone? Is that Mr. Hall?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a quick question for Dr. Tomlin. Is it any teacher that you know of out there who does not have a clear license, I call it, cannot get this 1 year extension? Any situations?
So there is one situation, and if I could defer your question until the end of the presentation, I go over some considerations, and there is one situation that I would like to discuss with the board.
And that might be the one I've been made aware of. Thank you.
I think it might be. I'm gonna be proud of the batting average I have. You know, one out of the couple.
You've done a great job. I can't wait to hear it.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Absolutely.
So section 2.26A, this is an extension for other school personnel, school administrators specifically, and in other positions in elementary and secondary schools. They also have an extension they are allowed to meet they don't have the attempt in the first, pass in the third provision for their licenses. So they are allowed to attempt in the first. Now, the first section covers the principal examination, licensure exam. We do not currently have that in the state. But again, we wanted just to put this in there. The second bullet is more important here. Those professional positions within a school, and again, this is guidance counselors and other student support personnel, they would have the first year to meet the requirement rather than having to pass the licensure exam out of as a condition for license. So this next section, I wanted to cover some additional COVID-19 policy revisions that we put into LIC in 001 from feedback from the field. Of course, these are in purple so that you know that they are not technically described in the statute. The first one modifies section 1.5. A teacher who holds a North Carolina CTE restricted license who has not met the examination and coursework requirements has an extension until June 2021. Technically, these folks are not lateral entry, so we felt like it was important to call them out individually. That extension is under the authority of the board, and so we're making that recommendation to the board today. The second one deals with an emergency license holder who held a permit to teach as of March 10th, 2020. They shall be eligible for an emergency license. So these are applicants for an emergency license who currently hold a permit to teach. Because they may have not been able to meet the coursework, to get the coursework done that would allow them to advance, we're relaxing the 24-hour coursework requirement for those folks so they can move. I'm sorry, it is the 18-hour requirement to hold an emergency license. We're relaxing that requirement for them so they can move from the permit to teach to the emergency license as part of the pathway to a residency license. It's very important here to recognize that though we're waiving the requirement on the front end, that same applicant will be required to obtain the required 24 hours of content in order to convert the emergency license to a residency license. So we're just relaxing it on the front end, but we're keeping the provision as it stands for those people at the end of the 2021 school year. They would have to meet the 24-hour requirement to convert the emergency to a residency license. We had to do it this way because the legislature did not extend the expiration of an emergency license in the same way they did for other licenses. That is in statute, that is a 1-year non-renewable license. So we could not extend those licenses for another year. And that was not included in the statute that extended other licenses. The next section deals with residency license and or admission to an SBE approved residency program. So for those folks who currently hold an emergency license, they had to have 24 hours in order to be permitted to a State Board of Education approved residency program. Where they don't meet that requirement of 24 hours, we are waiving that requirement on the front end, that they hold that 24 hours in order to be admitted, or the licensure exam. Now, in the same fashion that I just talked about the emergency license, these folks will have to meet either the 24 content hours or pass the licensure exam in order to renew that residency license for the 21-22 school year. So in all the way we've set this up is we've relaxed the requirements on the front end, but still maintained those requirements for moving on to the next phase or to renew the license. And then the final section deals with visiting foreign nationals who are on work visas. I'm sorry, we're still on the previous slide. There we go. It's number 4 on this. In the event that the U.S. State Department provides an extension to work visas for visiting foreign nationals, the State Board of Education will allow those international faculty licenses to be extended beyond the current maximum of 5 years. The expiration of the North Carolina International Faculty License may not extend beyond the expiration date of the license holder's visa or work authorization. So at the time of the writing, we had gotten word that the U.S. State Department was going to extend the visas for visiting foreign nationals during this pandemic so that they could remain in place and not have to travel during the pandemic. So in recognition of that, we are allowing their license, if folks are at their end of their license renewal for that particular license, which is 5 years, they can extend for 1 more year, but it can't exceed whatever the expiration of the work visa or their visa or their work authorization as provided by the U.S. State Department. We have gotten word that the U.S. State Department has made this move. I have not verified that independently yet, but the policy is written as conditional. So if the State Department doesn't act, you're not extending those licenses. I will pause right there before I get into the considerations. If there's any questions or clarity I can bring to these policies. I apologize. I know this is a whole lot of stuff to rush through pretty quickly.
Dr. Tomberlin, just a point of, I suppose, a point of reminder, perhaps it's 2 to 3 slides back, where in the bullet point, there's mention of the 24 hours. You're going to change that to 18, and that is relative to the applicants for the emergency license. They now go back. I'm not sure.
So yes, so the policy is correct. I misspoke. So that is on slide 22.
Probably. I think you just have to make a correction.
Right there. So so what I said was they needed 24 hours for the emergency license. That's not correct. What I said was incorrect. But the policy is stating that if you held a permit to teach this year, we will let you move to an emergency license regardless of the number of content hours that you have relevant to the license. The next sentence is what's important. That applicant, even though we waive that content requirement, that applicant will still be required to have 24 hours of relevant content in order to convert that emergency license that we let them move into to a residency license in the 2021-22 school
I
year.
see. Okay, that is clarifying it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and I'm sorry that I misspoke about what was required of the emergency permit. I did say, the emergency license, I did say it was 24. It's actually 18, but we'll take them regardless of the number of hours they have for this year to move them
That
forward.
makes it extra clear. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so if there's not any other questions about the actual policies, here's some considerations that I think the board needs to be aware of, given the intersections of all these policies. So the first one is residency license holders were given an extension, and that refers back to the elementary ed and the ECGC licenses. But no teacher currently in the state with a residency license in elementary or ECGC is in their third year. So none of them have what I would call a terminal expiration date of June 30th, 2020. Now, what has been asked from the field is, does the law effectively give them an additional year on the residency license? Since they're not in their terminal year, they're not extended to 2021. So the question has come, does that mean they get a fourth year? And the answer to that question is no. We don't interpret the law to say that the policy adds an additional year to those who are in their second year. They get their third year and then again another fourth year. So I just wanted to clarify that has been a question that's come up, and that is our position. And if the board sees it differently, we would certainly be open to listening to that. EPP accountability for the 1920 school year will be based solely on recent graduate and employer surveys. Because we don't have NESIS and we don't have EVOS, those report cards that we're reporting to the JLEOC will only contain those survey data. The issue here is, as we've discussed before with the board, the response rates on these two surveys are too low to consider them a valid measure of EPP quality. Those surveys are currently hovering in the 30 to 40% response rate. And currently there is no board policy that requires either the program completer or the employer to complete that survey. NCDPI will not require all licenses with a June 30th, 2020 expiration to be extended. So this is really important. The law gives the opportunity for the extension to 2021. It doesn't require all licenses be extended. So those who have completed the requirements to convert their license to a CPL or to renew that CPL will have that opportunity to continue with the renewal process. It is only those that elect to take the extension that will be extended. Statute waives EPP admissions requirements, but many EPPs indicate that they will not waive those requirements because of an impact to their accreditation. This position may create issues for current emergency license holders. So I hope this is the question that Mr. Hall raised. We have a situation where we have a person with an emergency license who is planning, who can't meet the deadline to be admitted to an EPP. While the policy allows them to hold the license, the requirement that the residency license candidate be both employed by an LEA or charter school and be enrolled in an EPP, those conditions remain. And so there's no way for us to grant that emergency license holder a residency license because they don't meet those statutory requirements. This is a problem for us because those conditions of holding the residency license were not waived. And so we do have I don't know how broad this situation is, but it has been brought to my attention by the General Assembly. And I hope this covers Mr. Hall's question as well. We don't currently have a solution for that problem. We cannot mandate an EPP to accept a candidate, but the EPP denied admission does disqualify the candidate from holding the residency license.
Thank you, sir. It's very clear to me now.
Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin. And Mr. Hall, so I'm gathering that your question was answered.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Tomberlin. I'm going to have to expedite this. I apologize. I've been given the indicator that we're running out of time for ES&P report items. So very, very good work, Dr. Tomberlin. If there are no other questions of my colleagues, comments, would you move on to the new business item? And I would ask you to be considerate of the time. It's a very important item. I wish that we had another hour.
Certainly. Last month the board passed the policy eval, the guidance around evaluation. This is just a reiteration of this, and there's an FAQ here that kind of explains our position on things. I think explaining that policy to the field, but some of the questions from board members would be captured in this as well. And particularly, I will skip down to, I invite you to read this, and then I'm happy to take any questions outside of this meeting that you might have. It specifically addresses the questions that arose around number 6. What about teachers in their renewal year? So if a teacher is deemed less than proficient on the most recent valid observation, the LEA will be notified that they have to put them on an improvement plan, and they will be reverted to an IPL. For this year, since most of these teachers will not have a valid 2019-20 evaluation, the LEA can petition the state board to waive that requirement to revert if the LEA can provide documentation that teacher would have shown proficiency had the process been able to move forward. To do this, we're going to leverage that IPL form that we use for when EPPs deny recommendation for an IPL. We bring those to you directly from the board. We will use we will repurpose that form and bring those requests to the board for approval. All teachers will be evaluated this year locally, not in the NESA system unless they meet the state board's requirements. But this would give the LEA an opportunity to petition the board to say, this teacher actually improved over the year, and the reversion to the IPL would not be appropriate. So that's how we're proposing to handle that in the case of a missing evaluation for a teacher. Those are not common, those reversions, and so we would not anticipate very many of those.
Okay, very good. And that information that you're just presenting to us is in reference to the state board's passage of a revision policy, the revisions to the teacher evaluation policy, and we did that, I think, on the 23rd of April.
Yes, ma'am.
Very, very good work and very good guidance to the field. I think I've gotten way ahead of myself. Oh my. So we do have to kind of rapidly, Dr. Tomberlin, go through the other 2 items.
So the good news is these are much shorter. The COVID-19 benefits policy manual revision. So this just extends. I don't know if we have a slide on that, but I can talk through this. You can certainly look at the materials. The only revision we made here was 16.3. So this session law did include a provision that allowed the 6-month waiting period for eligible retirees to return to work in public schools. I have checked with the retirement system. NCDPI has no role in this determination. And so, but I wanted to make LEAs aware of that this provision exists and direct them to the retirement system if they have employees that they feel they want to leverage during the COVID-19 outbreak, and the retirement system will handle those provisions and those determination of eligibility. And that's it. Then the final one is the contagious disease policy update. I will go ahead and take this unless Mr. Snyder wants to walk through this.
Sure, Tom, I'll just give you a break because you've been carrying so much water here today.
Thank you, sir.
Board members, this is just a continuation of the disease policy that we've seen over the past couple months, extending that COVID-19 state of emergency leave through June 15th of this year. There are minor clarifications in this policy. One, clarifying that our educators and public school employees at the education services for the deaf and blind schools, i.e. our residential schools, are eligible for this. Also a provision explaining that if a district, for example, had a scheduled school year completion date before June 15th, that the emergency leave would not be otherwise available after the end of that school year. So, for example, a 10-month employee who was supposed to end on June 5th would not be able to take the leave for the 6th through the 15th. But otherwise, this is the same policy that we've had in place here since March.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. And to my colleagues, do you have any questions about any of the items that have been presented today? I want to thank Dr. Tomberlin, Mr. Snyder, and your staff for just remarkable work. I mean, these revisions to current policy had to take much time and thought, and probably rethinking to make sure all the particulars are covered. So if there are no other questions, just again, thank you for hard work. And Chair Davis, that does conclude my report.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We'll now turn to our Business Operations Committee, and Chair of that committee is Vice Chair Duncan. Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Along with Todd Chastain, we lead the Business Operations Committee, and we have two items for action on first reading today. First one is BizOp 1, which is the COVID-19 policy amendment for allotments to allow the distribution of the school nutrition $75 million allotment that was recently made by the General Assembly from the CARES funds that had been allocated to North Carolina for use by the General Assembly. We're very grateful for this allotment. It was very important to this board in the work of this board and the expressions of this board about how we need to make sure we provide nutrition for our students as a hallmark to also keeping them well, healthy, and whole children, and part of the educational process. So thank you to everyone for the support that was so important to getting an allocation of these funds. I think we have Alexis Chouse, who's going to talk about the allotment policy. Lynn Harvey and Janet Johnson are also available to discuss any of these issues. But all of these folks have done tremendous work. Lynn and Janet and their staff have worked tirelessly to keep school nutrition going. I just want to again express thanks for that. And we received some information that's helpful to us with respect to this allotment during the course of this meeting earlier this morning, or during this morning, during the course of our meeting. And so either Lynn Harvey or Eric Snyder may want to also take the opportunity to comment on that. So with that, I think I should go, Alexis, to you first, to go through the allotment policy, and we can go from there.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you. This is Alexis. In the materials you can see up on the screen the allotment policy. It is pretty basic as allotment policies go. The General Assembly in House Bill 1043 did provide the formula that should be used or shall be used for the allocation to any public school unit that participates in the National School Lunch Program or the School Breakfast Program. So the funds are allocated based on the total of federal reimbursements and eligible student meal receipts that the school district would have anticipated to have received. And the February 2020 data was used to calculate the allocation. You can see in your materials also there is the planning allotments as the calculation is calculated by each public school unit. So you can see how it falls out between the school districts and the charter schools and the residential school that is eligible for these funds. The special provisions associated with this allocation, many of this language is from the U.S. Department of Treasury guidance that accompanies the coronavirus the coronavirus relief fund. The underlying source of these funds for House Bill 1043 are the coronavirus relief funds. These funds are part of the CARES Act, and they do have requirements and some restrictions that are put on by the federal government. And so these special provisions that are in 1, 2, 3, 4 are coming from the U.S. Department of the Treasury. The number 5 that is giving the period of allowable expenditures, that is from the General Assembly in the House Bill 1043, and they put the requirement that the funds shall be used for expenditures incurred in this fiscal year, so that will end at the end of 2019-20 school year. With that, I will pass over to Dr. Hartley in case she has some additional items that she would like to address.
Dr. Harvey?
Thank you, Alexis, and to members of the board for your efforts to advocate for these funds on behalf of school nutrition programs. As we know, beginning March 16th, our local school nutrition directors moved aggressively to make sure that our most food insecure, vulnerable students were provided meals to continue to sustain them. These tireless heroes have become first responders in many communities, and we certainly want to acknowledge their continued work. We further want to acknowledge that the pandemic did create expenditures in the school nutrition programs, which are funded largely through federal reimbursement funds and local student payments, that the increased demand for meals did exceed operating costs beyond those that had been budgeted. So as we look at this, we're pleased this morning, and I'll ask Mr. Snyder to address this momentarily. We are pleased to have received within the hour a communication from the U.S. Department of Agriculture confirming that the State Board of Education's request for using these funds does appear to be consistent with those of the CARES Act. The letter does further direct us to ensure due diligence as we oversee the use of these funds related to local expenditures, which our division certainly is prepared to do so. So we're very pleased to see this affirmation from our federal agency of jurisdiction and look forward to working with the school business division, with local school nutrition directors, superintendents, finance officers, certainly members of the board, as we continue to move forward to make these funds available to our school nutrition programs so they may continue with the robust work they're doing in the months of June, July, and August to continue to ensure the nutrition needs of our children are met during this emergency state. Eric, would you care to comment in addition about the confirmation we've received today from the U.S. Department of Agriculture?
Sure, I'll just speak very briefly. Thank you, Lynn and Alexis, for your very helpful comments here today. Certainly, as the state board and the department and districts look to expend these funds in support of the efforts that have been undertaken to date and that will be undertaken this summer to address this public health emergency, we want to make sure that our districts and our state are minding those appropriate safeguards set up by the federal law and guidance from the Treasury. And we greatly appreciate the quick work that USDA has done in helping us provide some additional guidance for these unbudgeted expenses that were really not contemplated by local districts as we headed into this state of emergency. So certainly as districts look to recoup those costs for the emergency response expenses that they've incurred since March this year, we will encourage them to look closely at the guidance from Treasury, any further guidance from USDA, and also work with the department and the Pandemic Response Office, with the Office of State Budget and Management, in order to ensure that we are checking all the appropriate boxes as we do this very important work of responding to the public health and nutrition needs of our students across the state. And certainly great applause for all those on the local level who are continuing these very important efforts as we respond to the pandemic. Those are my only comments.
Thank y'all. Are there any questions or comments from our board members or advisors? Not hearing any, let's move on to biz op number 2, which is the state board policy amendment for federal funding grant. This is the CARES Act grant, the $396 million. Again, an allotment policy is necessary with respect to distribution of these funds. And again, obviously following carefully federal guidelines would be important. I believe Alexis Schaus is here to report on the allotment policy for this particular federal funding grant.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So this is related to the CARES Act K-12 Emergency Relief Fund, which is a different section of the CARES Act from what we were just previously referring to as the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So this allotment policy was approved by the state board at its last meeting, and since the language states in there that the eligibility is to those public school units that received Title I funds in the most recent fiscal year. And so that would be this 2019-20. We were, based on that, charter schools, new charter schools that were opening July 1 would not have been eligible. The U.S. Department of Ed put out a statement that new charter schools that are opening next year, as well as charter schools that have a significant growth next year between last year and this year, are eligible for a portion of the funds. This is consistent with other federal grants, how they are treated. So as a result, we have added this language. We have provided an update to the allocations, and you will see at the bottom of those allocations, there is a reserve for new and high growth charter schools, and those funds will be used for that purpose. The other change to those planning allotments that you will see is that charter schools that declined, they waived their right to the Title I. Those funds have been distributed across all the other entities. So that is the situation there as a status with regards to the funding of these K-12 emergency relief funds. The applications are available to eligible public school units, and they are being received by our federal programs area for review and approval. And once that has occurred, we will be able to start allocating those funds.
Thank you, Alexis. Michelle, the issues, some of the criteria we know, what's reflected in the distributions on the distribution sheet relating to this allotment for the various LEAs and charter schools around the state is a 90% distribution. half of 1% or up to that amount can be reserved by the department for purposes of administrative oversight and cost. And certainly there will be some needs there. Certainly we want oversight over such a significant sum of money and an important sum of money for our districts. And so I know the department's working on a budget for how much of that they will need, and we will see that shortly. In addition to that, there's the 10% reserve, which is out of the 10% of the department's budgetary needs in order to properly administrate this grant would come in, and then there's the remaining reserves that can be used for appropriate uses that have been set out and discussed. A couple other things to highlight that I think are important here is that any funds that have been approved must be spent within the year, and so this is something that we want to think through wisely because we don't want to have all the funds spent immediately. There's also guidance in here that we should expect significant reentry costs, and so there's going to be there are important needs out there, but there are also going to be reasonable anticipated costs for reentry, and I know our districts feel that pressure very much. And so the state board, as part of this allotment policy, is urging balance in terms of how to try to best use these funds for the appropriate uses, which are reasonably broad in nature. But to best use these funds to best help the district with the various needs, both existing and reasonably anticipated, be coming forward. And the last thing is, and this, again, the department, I think, there are things here, the department may be of great assistance here. There are things listed, for example, that purchases of disinfectants and purchases of sanitation materials to help the students and to help keep the facilities as sanitized as possibly can be. Those are kinds of things we can be looking at bulk contracts and help our districts in terms of getting the best value achievable. The same thing with the example that's used with potential for electronic devices, if that's an interest or purchasing interest for some of the LEAs that have a need, given, for example, our previous discussion today on remote learning. So these provisions that are set out, these special provisions are very important part of the overall thought process for use of these funds, and thank you for the care that's been taken in drafting these. Are there questions or comments about this item in terms of the allotment policy? Not hearing any. Chair Davis, I will thank you for the time and turn this back to you, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. Before we move to our final agenda item concerning adoption of our emergency rules into permanent rules, I'd like to express our gratitude and appreciation to Mr. Snyder, our General Counsel. While this is his final official meeting as our General Counsel, his contributions, his impact, and his influence upon our teachers and students and upon each one of us will endure far beyond his years of service. During a uniquely tumultuous time filled with unforeseen challenges and obstacles, Mr. Snyder has displayed the ultimate professionalism, skill, and grace in advising this board and the agency. Despite many hurdles, Mr. Snyder dedicated countless hours to a number of important items, such as child nutrition, emergency leave, the ANDRO rulemaking, district compliance, licensure, and contracts, which will live long past his departure and will continue to inform our future work. Mr. Snyder personifies courage, always leaning in to confront the tough issues, and we know that his next employer will benefit from his tenacity, his willingness to fight for what he believes in, his smoothness with the written language, his thoroughness with vetting the smallest detail within every project, and his often timely comedy relief that he brings at just the right moment. Mr. Snyder, we thank you for your many contributions and know that you'll be missed. We wish you much success as you begin your new role, and we will invite you back at a later meeting for a more formal send-off and for comments, I'm sure, by my colleagues. During the month of May, we've lifted up Lighthouse leaders and can say that you have been a beacon of light for all of us and for our students in our state. You leave a lasting mark that will continue to light the way for years to come. So thank you, and I'll now turn to you for any remarks you'd like to make, as well as presentation of our final agenda item. Mr. Snyder.
Well, shucks, Mr. Davis, thank you for those very wonderful comments. I might reserve for a moment my moment of personal privilege to thank the board. But as always, there's work in front of us. So if I might talk about the board's proposed adoption of emergency rules first, if that's all right. So today on this item of new business, that's not really new business. The board's been working on permanent rules for some time. Would ask the board to adopt the proposed permanent rules that have been published in the North Carolina Register for some time, and also authorize the board's legal office and the State Board office to address any housekeeping matters that are necessary to address with these items before they're provided to the Rules Review Commission, as well as direct the department and board office to take any additional steps in order to meet the Administrative Procedure Act and the session law that's provided this unique path forward for rulemaking. Just moving quickly through these slides here at this late hour, board members, you'll recall in this recent background slide that we do indeed have to do rulemaking, and the General Assembly's passed a couple bills to help you move through that process for your existing policies to help those appropriate ones get into the administrative code. Looking at Session Law 2019-154, we are at this step of asking the board to adopt those emergency rules as permanent rules ahead of the May 30th deadline. As we've discussed previously, we have gone through the Administrative Procedure Act processes for gathering public comment and holding public hearings, and those materials from the public are available on the e-board site for your consideration. But most importantly, as the legislature has indicated, this is a process primarily to avoid disruption in our K-12 setting, which is of course very important at these particular times, and would essentially keep the status quo of these policies, just moving them to where they appropriately belong now, and that's in the administrative code. So board members, you have in front of you a number of rules concerning a number of topics, including transportation, licensure, teacher education, EPPs, as well as employee benefits, graduation requirements, testing, textbooks, safe schools, athletics, accountability, and advisory committees, as well as charter schools, job nutrition, some internal operation issues in federal programs, as well as some rules related to our educational services for the deaf and blind. Those have been sort of in the hopper here for some time, and I would ask the board to adopt those as permanent rules so they can be sent forward to the Rules Review Commission for further consideration later this summer. Board members, any questions with respect to this item? Hearing none, I do again appreciate the kind words, Chair Davis. I'm pleased to end with a public comment just to thank the board. Not to be a cliche, but it has truly been an honor to work with this board, the talented board staff, and the many dedicated public servants here at the department, as well as our colleagues across state government, including at the Attorney General's office, the Rules Review staff over at the Office of Administrative Hearings, our colleagues at DIT and DHHS, and in great detail, we've worked lately with members of the General Assembly, our partners at the Governor's office, and I've had the unique opportunity to plug in with lawyers who are responsible for advising their agencies during the emergency efforts. It's truly been a great professional opportunity, and I'm grateful to this board for its continued confidence over the past couple years, and I'm especially thankful for Chairman Kobe and Vice Chair Collins for extending this opportunity to me some some years ago now. I've been inspired by the board and its advisors, as well as the public servants who've spent time, dedicate their time on the Charter School Advisory Board and in PEPC, and around the table in our Educator Ethics Advisory Committee. It has been a pleasure to work with this group and to serve our schools, and I will miss that time and that very important purpose. Even so, I look forward to the new opportunity to remain in state government with a new position with the Department of Information Technology, providing support for the Health Information Exchange Authority. You might know it as NC Health Connects. Their mission is to improve health outcomes for our citizens and to provide support for our medical providers across the state. I look forward to continued service of our citizens in our state in that capacity, and will always carry with me the important principles that this board brings to all the issues it considers concerning equity and improving lives of North Carolina citizens. So board members, thank you for this opportunity. It has been a pleasure serving for you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Snyder, and we wish you. Oh, please go ahead.
And I should say here at the end, of course, there are too many individuals to thank, but I really should extend a deep piece of gratitude to my lovely bride, Allie Snyder, who's a longtime teacher, as well as my daughters, who've given me a great amount of birth to do this work for the board, and I appreciate their ongoing support and their help and their feedback as I've served the board. So thank you, Chair Davis. Thank you, board members.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. You are certainly a well-blessed man, and we are all together better for having this opportunity to work closely with you. And we look forward to having you back as a special guest at one of our future meetings, as I mentioned before. But even more, we look forward with great anticipation to our paths continuing to cross as we serve the citizens of North Carolina. Thank you so much. Board members, seeing that there are not any other items of new business, I'll close by reminding that at our next meeting, we look forward to receiving an update on school reentry planning for the 2020-2021 school year. And as we close out this year, we share our expectations that districts and public school units will continue to follow the guidance, policy, and statutes pertaining to the school calendar and continue remote instruction to the end of the scheduled school year. Doing so is so important in terms of maximizing every available instructional moment that we have with our students under any circumstance, but particularly now. And it'll also inform our future summer learning opportunities. Under the governor's direction, we're poised to enter phase 2 in our state, and districts continue to close out the school year with graduation ceremonies and other well-deserved celebrations. Please remember the social distancing guidelines and mandates that are in place to ensure the health and safety of our staff and all of our students. We'll now turn to action on our agenda items, and I note for the record that Mr. Buxton is recused from ES&P 1. At this time, I ask, is there any request to remove any item from our action or action on first reading agenda? Hearing none, I seek a motion to approve the following: SLA 1, ES&P 1 through 3, and BizOp 1 and 2. Is there a motion?
Yeah, Ms. JB, I'd move approval and also note that an amended version of SLA 1 will include the 2 additional required items as number 14 and 15 on the list of required items.
Motion by Mr. Buxton with the adjustment so noted to SLA 1. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Hall. Any discussion on this motion?
Just a question, Chair Dave. Do we need to vote on do we need to vote on the adoption of the emergency rules?
Very good. Thank you for that assist there, Mr. Duncan. You know, every man needs or person needs a good vice chair, and you certainly are one. So yes, Mr. Buxton, would you agree to amend the motion to include the rulemaking presentation by Mr. Schneider?
I would accept that friendly amendment.
Thank you. And Mr. Hall, would you accept that as a second?
I will.
Any other questions or comments on the motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton,
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers, Dr.
Yes.
Tipton, thank you. Ms. White,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Ford. Mr. Ford, can you say that one more time clearly for the record? Thank you. Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis,
Yes.
it's unanimous.
Okay, terrific. Motion carries. Thank you. And thanks to all board members, advisors, and staff for your attention and participation in today's meeting. I now seek a motion to go into closed session, and note for the audience and online listeners that following closed session, this May 21st, 2020 meeting will adjourn immediately. Mr. Duncan?
Thank you, Chair Davis. I move that the State Board of Education go into closed session to consult with our attorneys to discuss Polk County versus the State of North Carolina and North Carolina Board of Education, Amplify Education, Inc. versus North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, personnel matters, other attorney-client privilege matters, and information that is privileged and confidential pursuant to 09 NCAC 06B.0103, confidentiality of solicitation documents, and 09 NCAC 06B.0309, evaluation.
Motion by Mr. Duncan. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Kamnitz. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton,
Yes.
Dr. Oxendine,
Yes.
Ms. Kamnitz,
Yes.
Mr. Keenan,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers,
Yes.
Ms. White,
Yes.
Mr. Ford, Vice Chair Duncan,
Yes.
Chair Davis,
Yes.
it's unanimous.
The motion carries. Let's take a 10-minute break and be back at 12:15 into closed session. Dr. Townsend Smith, any directions on moving to closed?
Yes, sir. We're going to go offline now. So live streaming stops. And if you're not a board member, please exit the meeting at this time, and we will keep the meeting open for board members and those who need to participate in closed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We will reconvene at 12:15.